I never thought my life would begin with abandonment, but sometimes the people who walk away create space for the ones who truly stay. That line sounds dramatic when I say it now, but when you're a child, abandonment doesn't feel surprising. It doesn't feel very clear. It feels silent. It feels like the world suddenly shifted, and you don't understand why. My story didn't begin in comfort or luxury. It began with a choice my mother made to leave before I was old enough to even call her mom. My father used to tell me, when I was old enough to understand, how it all unfolded. Back then, he was a deliveryman. He worked long hours, crisscrossing the city on his old motorcycle. He wasn't rich. He wasn't powerful. But he had dreams of building a life with my mother, the woman he loved. When she told him she wanted to pursue a teaching course, he didn't hesitate. "Go for it," he said. "We'll make it work." She explained the fees would be high, almost more than they could afford, nearly $1 lakh in tuition. That was money they didn't have. But my father wasn't the kind of man who said no when someone he loved asked for support. So he sold the one thing he treasured, his motorcycle. His only way of getting to work quickly is his one piece of independence. He traded it away, telling himself a bicycle would do for now. He could make deliveries slower, maybe struggle through the heat, but it was worth it. After all, this was for their future, for her career, for their growing family. When he handed her the money, he believed he was investing in a shared dream. What he didn't know was that her dream was never truly with him. After another tiring day, he arrived home one evening. Sweat clung to his back, and his legs felt sore from cycling miles on that old bike. He opened the door, hoping to find his wife, perhaps hear her voice, or catch the aroma of dinner cooking. Instead, he was greeted by silence. And me. A baby girl lay in the crib, wailing, bewildered, and alone. On the table rested a letter, wrinkled, hastily written, with the ink slightly blurred. My father picked it up with trembling hands. "David, please forgive me, but I had to make this decision. I was in love before our marriage. I couldn't be with him then, as my family compelled me to marry you. But now I have my career, and I can finally pursue the life I desire. Please care for the baby. Thank you." That was it. No explanation beyond her old love, no promise to return. Just a thank you, as if leaving behind a husband and newborn daughter was a favor. My father told me he stood there frozen for what felt like hours, the letter trembling in his hands. And then he looked down at me. I was still crying, my tiny fists clenched, my face red. He picked me up and held me against his chest. That night, something inside him broke. But something else was born too. He whispered into my ear, "Don't you worry, baby girl. Daddy's got you." Soon after, my father moved us to Chicago, South Side to be exact. Rent was cheaper there, though the neighborhood was rough. We lived in a one-bedroom apartment with peeling paint and a heater that barely worked. At night, sirens outside our window sang louder than lullabies. To most, South Side was a place to escape from. But for us, it was survival. Daddy juggled 2 jobs during the week, sometimes 3 on weekends. In the mornings, he carried heavy boxes in a warehouse. At night, he delivered food, pedaling through traffic on his bicycle. And through all of it, he carried me too. I don't remember those early days vividly. I was too small. But I've seen the pictures. I've heard the stories from neighbors. A young man, barely more than a boy himself, biking through the blistering heat of summer and the freezing winds of winter, his baby girl strapped to his chest or balanced carefully in a basket seat. Judged. Why bring your child along? Isn't that dangerous? Others mocked him. What kind of father drags his baby through the streets while making deliveries? But Daddy didn't have a choice. There was no one else to watch me. No one else to hold me when he worked. my mother had left and his family wasn't nearby. So he did what he had to do. He took me everywhere, to warehouses that smelled of oil and sweat, to restaurants where he waited for delivery orders, to cramped apartments where customers exchanged food for crumpled bills. And through all of it, he never once complained. He smiled at me, kissed my forehead, and whispered the same promise over and over. "Don't you worry, baby girl. Daddy's got you." Looking back now, I realize the weight of that decision. He could have left me at a shelter. He could have walked away just like my mother did. Society might have even forgiven him. After all, raising a newborn alone in poverty was nearly impossible. But he didn't. He chose me. He chose sleepless nights over freedom. He chose patched shoes over comfort. He chose to be both father and mother when the world gave him no help. That choice shaped everything. It meant my childhood wasn't ordinary. It meant my lullabies were sirens and my toys were secondhand. But it also meant I grew up wrapped in the fiercest kind of love, the kind forged in sacrifice. So when I think of abandonment, I don't think only of loss. I think of what comes after. Because yes, my mother walked away. She chose another path. She left me behind without looking back. But my father? He stayed. He stayed through hunger. He stayed through exhaustion. He stayed when people laughed, when neighbors whispered, when the world seemed determined to break him down. And because he stayed, I never felt unloved. Because he stayed, I learned that strength isn't about never falling. It's about carrying someone else even when you're already broken. That's where my story begins. Not with the woman who left, but with the man who refused to. Every cracked sidewalk I walked on as a child was paid for by the blisters on my father's hands. The South Side of Chicago was no place for fairy tales. It wasn't the kind of neighborhood where children played carefree on manicured lawns, or where families gathered around backyard barbecues. It was gritty, it was restless, and it demanded more from everyone who lived there, especially from a single father raising a little black girl all on his own. The daily grind. By the time I was old enough to notice, my father had perfected the art of exhaustion. He'd wake up before sunrise, slipping quietly out of our tiny one-bedroom apartment so as not to disturb my sleep. His warehouse job started early, and those boxes didn't care how tired he was. They didn't care if his back ached or if his shoes had holes worn thin. I recall the mornings when I would open one eye just enough to see him quietly walking to the door. He would glance back, hesitate for a moment, and softly say, "Daddy loves you." After that, the door would close, bringing back the stillness of our small apartment. By the late afternoon, he was already working his second job, delivering orders, bringing groceries, whatever earned him enough to pay the rent and a bit extra. At times, he returned home so late that I was already in bed. Other times, he would skip dinner altogether, nudging the plate toward me and saying, "You finish it, baby girl. Daddy already ate at work." I was unaware of the truth back then. I didn't realize he was lying just to ensure I had enough. A child's viewpoint, kids observe more than we give them credit for. I was aware of the incessant sirens outside our window. I realized how neighbors fought in the hallway, their voices sometimes so loud that bottles crashed against the walls. I also noticed the looks people gave us, pity mixed with judgment, like the woman at the corner store who once whispered, "Poor thing, a little girl needs her mother," or the man outside the warehouse who shook his head when he saw me sitting in the basket of my father's delivery bike. What kind of father drags his child around in this heat? I didn't understand their words back then, but I understood tone. I understood they thought less of us, and each time I watched my father's jaw tighten, his shoulders stiffen, but he never answered back. He just held me a little closer and kept moving. My father's shoes. There's one memory that sticks in my mind clearer than most. We were walking back from the grocery store, bags heavy in his hands, the summer heat pressing down like a weight. I was holding his finger, my tiny steps struggling to keep up with his tired stride. And then I noticed his shoes. The soles were separating from the base, held together with strips of leather was cracked, almost gray instead of black. His socks peeked through holes at the sides. "Daddy," I asked innocently, "why don't you get new shoes?" He laughed, that kind of laugh that isn't really joy, but a way to hide pain. "Nah, baby girl, these shoes still got miles in 'em." What I didn't know was that every dollar he didn't spend on himself was another dollar spent on me. Those broken shoes paid for my notebooks. They paid for my school trips. They paid for milk when rent was due and nothing else was left. There were nights when the loneliness pressed heavily on me. Nights when the walls of our apartment felt too thin, when the shadows stretched too long, when I wished I had a mother to tuck me in or read me a story. I'd curl up on the couch, waiting for Daddy to come home. Sometimes I'd fall asleep before he returned, only to wake up under a blanket I didn't remember pulling over myself. He always made sure I was warm, even if it meant he slept on the floor. Other nights, when he came home early enough, he'd sit by my side. His eyes bloodshot from exhaustion, his hands rough and calloused, he'd still smile at me. "Want to hear a story, princess?" he'd ask. And even though his voice sometimes cracked from fatigue, he'd tell me tales of heroes and kingdoms, of battles and victories. Looking back, I realized those stories weren't just to entertain me. They were his way of promising that no matter how hard our lives were, we could still dream. At school, the differences between me and the other kids became clearer. They had neatly packed lunches, mine were simple, often leftovers. They wore brand new sneakers, mine were thrift store finds. They talked about vacations, birthday parties, and weekends at amusement parks. I stayed quiet. I didn't want them to know that my weekends were spent waiting at the window, hoping Daddy would come home early enough that we could sit together. That was my celebration, his presence. Sometimes I envied them. But then I'd remember my father's words, "Don't you worry, baby girl. Daddy's got you." And somehow, that was enough. The unseen battles. What I couldn't see then were the sacrifices behind the scenes. The nights he skipped meals so I could have more. He worked double shifts, even when his body begged for rest. The silent tears he shed when bills piled too high. But I saw the results. I saw the way he always showed up for me. Parent-teacher conferences? He was there, even if it meant walking straight from the warehouse in his work boots. School plays? He cheered louder than anyone, even if he was still wearing his delivery uniform. The world may have judged him, but I never did. To me, he was unstoppable. So when I think back to those streets of Southside, I don't just remember the cracked sidewalks or the constant sirens. I remember my father's hand holding mine. I remember the feel of his rough palm, the warmth of his tired smile, the sound of his voice promising me a better tomorrow. The world wanted me to see what I lacked. No mother, no money, no comfort. But all I saw was a man who never quit, a man who carried me on his bike, through heat and cold, through shame and judgment, through every obstacle life threw at him. And every step of the way, even in broken shoes, he kept that promise. "Don't you worry, baby girl. Duh. Daddy's got you." Dreams don't come cheap, and sometimes the hardest thing a parent ever learns is how much of themselves they'll have to give up so their child doesn't have to. She stopped at my desk, tapped my paper, and said, "You've got a voice, sweetheart. Don't you ever stop writing." It was one sentence, but for a little girl who had spent most of her life being seen as the one without a mother, it was everything. That night, I showed Daddy the paper. His eyes scanned the page slowly. He wasn't the best reader, not after dropping out in the 10th grade to help his own parents. But when he looked at me, his chest swelled with pride. "You wrote all this?" he asked. I nodded. He smiled, tired but glowing. "Baby girl, you're going to be something. Something more than me, more than this neighborhood." That's when the dream began. I wanted to write. I wanted to tell stories that mattered, stories that could reach people beyond our block, beyond the city. But wanting a dream and affording one were two very different things. The hidden math of Sacrifice College. Even the word felt expensive. Mrs. Johnson encouraged me, sliding brochures across her desk, whispering about scholarships and financial aid. But every time I brought it up at home, I saw the way Daddy's face tightened. He tried to hide it, but I noticed. I always noticed. At dinner one night, while we split a single piece of fried chicken between us, I asked, "Daddy, how much does college cost?" He hesitated, then finally said, "More than we got, princess. But don't you worry, we'll figure it out." That "we" really meant him. He picked up extra shifts at the warehouse. He stopped repairing the car and rode his old delivery bike, even when the chain squeaked like it was begging for mercy. He patched his work shirts so many times I lost count. Sometimes, when he thought I was asleep, I'd hear him at the kitchen table, calculator in hand, bills spread out like a battlefield, his head in his hands, his lips are moving in prayer. He wasn't just paying for rent or groceries. He was paying for my dream. $1, one blister, one sleepless night at a time. The temptation to quit. There was a point when I almost gave up. I was 14, and the reality of our life pressed down heavier than ever. Kids at school wore Jordans. I wore hand-me-downs. They talked about vacations. My summers were spent helping Daddy with deliveries. One afternoon, I came home angry. Angry at being different. Angry at watching him break himself for me. "Daddy," I blurted, "maybe I don't need college. Maybe I should just get a job after high school. Help you out." He stopped mid-motion, the plate he was washing still dripping with suds. Slowly, he turned to face me. His eyes burned, not with anger, but with something deeper. "Don't you ever say that again." "But, no buts." His voice cracked. He stepped closer, kneeling until he was eye level with me. "Listen, baby girl, I work so you don't have to. I break myself so you can build yourself. If you quit on your dream because of me, then all of this," he gestured at his calloused hands, his tired body, "it means nothing. Don't you dare rob me of the only thing that makes all this worth it." That was the night I realized. His sacrifices weren't just survival. They were an investment. The little victories, we celebrated victories in small ways. When I got my first A in English, Daddy brought home a slice of cheesecake from the corner diner. Just one slice, split down the middle, like it was a feast fit for queens. When I won a school writing contest, he skipped sleep after a double shift just to sit in the front row of the auditorium. His head nodded once or twice, exhaustion tugging him down. But when my name was called, he shot up and clapped so loud the whole room turned. And when I showed him my first acceptance letter from a summer writing program, he cried. Not big sobs, he wasn't that kind of man, but silent tears slid down his face as he hugged me, whispering over and over, "See, baby girl, you're already flying." The cost of hope. But each victory came with a price. Our fridge stayed emptier. Our apartment stayed smaller. His body grew more tired, his cough lingering longer in the winter. There were nights he came home too exhausted to even take off his boots. He'd collapse onto the couch, delivery bag still at his side. I'd cover him with a blanket, just like he always did for me. I wanted to scream at the unfairness of it. Why did chasing a dream mean watching the person I loved most in the world suffer? Why did it cost him everything, just so I could have a chance? But then I'd remember his words, "Don't you dare quit." So I didn't. Dreams cost more than money. They cost sleep, sweat, health, and sometimes hope itself. But my father paid the price without ever asking for a receipt. He didn't care if the world judged him for dragging his daughter along in the summer heat, or if they whispered about the shoes held together by tape. All he cared about was this: that one day his little girl would walk across a stage in a cap and gown, proving that his sacrifices weren't in vain. And though I didn't know how he'd get there, I knew this much: he would burn himself to ashes if it meant I could rise from them, because that's what love looks like when it's all you've got. I felt the weight of every mile Daddy had walked for me on the wooden floor, every delivery in the blistering sun with me strapped to his back, every late night shift. His eyes burned from exhaustion, but he still asked about my homework. He skipped every meal so I could eat, every prayer whispered over stacks of unpaid bills. This diploma in my hand wasn't made of paper. It was stitched together with his sacrifices. The hug that said it all. After the ceremony, I found him outside. The crowd spilled onto the lawn, families hugging, balloons floating, kids posing with flowers. I pushed through until I reached him. He stood there awkwardly, his shoulders stooped, holding a small bouquet of roses that looked like they'd been bought from a gas station on the way. The plastic still crinkled around them. "Daddy," I whispered, throwing my arms around him. He held me so tight I could barely breathe. His voice cracked against my ear. "We made it, baby girl. We made it." I pulled back, tears streaming down my cheeks. "No, Daddy, you made it. You carried me here." He shook his head, eyes glistening. "Nah, I just walked beside you." The shoes that carried us. As we stood there, I glanced down at his boots. The soles were nearly gone, the stitching pulling apart. And it hit me. Those shoes had carried him through more than just streets and shifts. They had taken me. Every step he took in those boots was one I didn't have to take barefoot. Every blister he bore was one I never had to feel. I vowed then and there, one day I'd buy him new shoes. Not just shoes, the life he deserved. Years later, I stood in a courtroom, wearing polished heels and a tailored suit. People looked at me and saw an attorney, confident and composed. But inside, I still saw that little girl on the south side, and I still saw Daddy in the back row clapping louder than anyone else, his boots worn thin but his pride unbreakable. I bought him new shoes eventually. Soft leather, strong soles, sturdy enough to last. He smiled when I gave them to him, but he never wore them much. "They're too nice for me," he'd chuckle. "Besides, these old ones still got miles in 'em." But I knew the truth. He didn't keep them because they were too nice. He kept them because they were proof that every mile he walked had meant something. When people ask me how I made it, I don't talk about scholarships or long nights of studying. I talk about him, about the man who chose to stay when someone else walked away. I talk about the sacrifices stitched into every crease of his hands, and about the prayers whispered over bills he couldn't pay, about the old boots that carried both of us farther than I ever thought possible. Because the truth is, my story isn't just mine, it's ours. So if you ever see a man in worn-out shoes, don't look away. Look closer, because you just might be staring at a hero. People think success is about standing tall, but what they don't see is who held you up when your legs were too small to stand on their own. My life began with abandonment, but it grew with devotion. A mother's absence left a hole, yet a father's love filled it so completely I never felt empty. Every award, every diploma, every courtroom victory I claim today carries his fingerprints, his sweat, his sacrifice. And though the world now sees me as the woman I've become, I'll always see myself as that little girl in secondhand shoes, clutching the hand of a tired man who refused to let go. So if you ever hear the sound of old boots hitting the pavement, don't dismiss it. That sound isn't just footsteps. It's a sacrifice. It's resilience. It's love. Because sometimes, the ones who walk beside us change our path forever. And for me, that man is my daddy. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe because I'll keep bringing you more true and emotional stories like this one.